3 months after the engagement with the pirate band, led by the former pirate king Yellowtooth, Rochelle stood before the massive, ornate doors of the Imperial Palace's visitors' wing. It had been decades since the former admiral stood upon the soil of Shill, decades that felt like they had been filled with the work of centuries, but she could still remember her actions on the day she left for the stars above. A champion of 3 live steel saber duels and 2 drinking contests, she had raised her blood-stained blade in salute to the Admiral Empress, hiding the rapidly emptying bottle of liquor behind her back, and drunkenly declared that she, Censor Lieutenant 2nd Grade Rochelle, shall surpass the woman carved in stone. Captain Rochelle, formerly Fleet Admiral, the Imperium's bloody hand, former leader of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, and breaker of the 7 Gates Pirate Queendom, tore her gaze away from the stony statue in the distance before she strode towards the massive doors. As tradition, a visitor would be allowed 2 attempts to open these doors on their own before the guards inside would open them. There was some long symbolic gesture or philosophical statement for it, but Rochelle simply found that a bit tiring. So she spoke with a few of her colleagues for their advice on what to do, and was given a proverb that could be used anywhere. Stride forward unflinchingly, plant your feet and do not hesitate. And so, Rochelle strode forward, planted her feet in the dirt of the cradle world, and shoved with her full might. The door swung open. The hangar doors closed as Runoff 3's interceptor settled into its cradle. Cookie looked back at his WSO as the canopy began to open, already feeling the effects of adrenaline beginning to wear off. His hand shook as sweat dripped into his eyes, while he could hear someone calling for him. An engineer ran up and helped Milk clamber out of the cockpit. She stood tall, ripped her helmet off, and threw her arms into the air with a roar of triumph before her legs collapsed out from under her and she hit the deck. Another deck crewwoman looked at Cookie, who gave her a quick "Shaka" that was captured by deck cameras, and would come to haunt him in every media depiction of the battle to come, before the light faded from the room, and his head hit the instrument panel in front of him. The door slowly ground open, as Rochelle leveraged her planted feet and pushed, the ancient wood creaking on its hinges before with one final effort, they swung fully open. Guards standing nearby moved back slightly, expecting to be required to aid her in opening the massive things, and finding themselves surprised as this ancient woman strode through them without a second's hesitation or pause. Taking a moment to look around the room and to brush her formal white gloves together, Captain Rochelle began her march forward. An Imperial herald stood halfway down the hallway and bowed low to the captain, hands clasped before him. His face was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Had Rochelle seen him in some news broadcast? "Greetings, honourable guest. I shall be your escort for this day. Please follow me, and I shall ensure you are presentable before you stand before the Empress." He had timed it perfectly. Rochelle was mere steps away when he finished his speech and stood back up, stepping to the side and allowing her to pass with an outstretched hand. "Let us walk together." And so, the two began walking further into the depths of the palace, all without Rochelle ever breaking stride. "Before you enter the halls, a message for you." Venture's Fourth resisted the urge to scream and punch a hole in the nearby bulkhead when one of her buddies on deck duty reported that Milk and Cookie returned safely, but had passed out the moment she left the interceptor. She resisted the impulse because it would startle one of the engineers near her doing some delicate wire work to keep oxygen circulating, and because if she punched a hole in the bulkhead, the entire damn ship might split in half with how badly the strain reports were looking. One of her engineers coughed, and Venture's Fourth snapped to look at her. "Before you do anything rash, because I see your fists clenching and I've known you since the academy," she began. "Dr. Say's Lies with steady hands just said she has a report for you and is waiting for you to take your internal comms off private, before she gets bored of waiting and hacks her way in. She pauses, and yes, those are her exact words. Ventures 4 felt her face flush as she realized that the internal text communication she had set up had been muted for the past hour after she almost shorted out half a console when she got startled by a message. Right, thanks, Seville. No problem, Ventures. Just paying you back for that thing with the physics test. The engineer waved before leaving the room to do whatever task she was assigned to. With a mental flick, the textcom system initialized in her synthetic eye, a string of code flashing and executing before the plain text messaging system appeared, ready for her to peruse. There were already dozens of mixed messages. Ventures 4 flinched and began opening and reading them. Nothing from her captain, luckily. There was, however, a long string of plain text messages from the doctor sent over by the Spear, which seemed to peter off when she had realized Ventures had her comms on mute. Embarrassing. That was the emotion. The Gears child hadn't done anything like that since she was child. So she forwarded a message back. V4. Sorry about that. Had my comms on mute for delicate repairs. V4. Did you need anything? Rock steady. I was checking in. It's not often I find a fellow Gears child in the fleet. I am Dr. Saves Lives with Steady Hands, Physician of the First Order and Chief Medical Officer of the Spear of the Clinagenia. V4. Which is weird. V4. I feel there should be a lot of us here. V4. V4. Ships. V4. Ventures forth bravely into great unknowns, acting chief engineer for this ship. V4. Actual chief eng is back on the Into Harm's Way, and the 2IC is out of commission. Rock steady. Could you use an extra hand? I'm tolerable when it comes to working with the internals of machines as well as organics. Ventures 4 took a moment to look around the command center and waved at her temporary second in command. Any repairs that need someone urgently? The second shook her head. Everything we're dealing with has got women on it already. Right now, the trick is keeping the Orgos out of the way. Roger, I'll pass that on, she replied, before going back to her messages. V4. At the moment, no. We're good on engineers. V4. Second did mention having problems keeping rescues, crew and prisoners out of the way. V4. Think you could help with that? V4. Please. Rock steady. Of course. I have a few convalescing orcas who would appreciate leaving the medbay. V4. Then, if you can, please have them make sure the people we rescued aren't tripping over the engineers. V4. You're tied into more comm stuff than I am. V4. Any news from Into Harm's Way? V4. Did Runoff make it back alive? Rocksteady. I do believe that Flight Officer Milk and Flight Officer Cookie will both make speedy recoveries. Thankfully, they've had nothing I haven't treated before, and it's a nice change of pace from my last resident human. Ventures 4 blinked before she scrambled to send her reply messages. Hurt? What happened? V4. Recoveries? What? V4. What happened? V4. Did Milk get hurt? V4. You've got to tell me. Rocksteady. Rest assured, it is nothing that a few hours sleep and some fluids won't cure. These humans are very resilient for organics. Her cranium was more than adequate to absorb the shock of passing out. V4. Doc being vague with what went wrong is not good. V4. Brain? V4. Pass out! Rocksteady. I take it that your interest in FO Milk is something more than professional. V4. Well. V4. V4. Maybe. Rocksteady. If you haven't learned already, I can send a file on where their sensor classes are most sensitive. These humans require touch and socialization to remain healthy. Not to the extent of our Shilvanti comrades, but it is necessary. Allow me, then, to be a bit more detailed. Rocksteady. FO Milk suffered surface bruising to her torso, waist and shoulders. 3 of her ribs on her right side also suffered bruising. She also has what these humans call a goose egg on her head when she unadvisedly hopped out of her craft, shucked her helmet, shouted, and collapsed to the deck. Rocksteady. Her body is currently recovering from an overdose of adrenaline. Now, I could take certain drastic measures that would most likely seem reasonable and necessary to you or to any of our people, but long experience treating a human aboard my own ship has taught me that the best way to treat a human is to, for the most part, stay out of their body's way. Rocksteady. I would advise you, as her significant other, to attend her bedside as soon as you are able. I have found that humans prefer the company of loved ones, while their body convalesces. V4. Okay. V4. If that's what you say. V4. Thanks. Ventures Forth sighed in relief, collapsing into a chair and dismissing the messaging app. Finally got news on your girlfriend? Seville needled. Shut the fuck up. Yes, Captain. A message you should read before you meet with the Empress. The herald spoke simply, handing over a datapad. There is further documentation inside if you wish to review it. Rochelle nodded, taking the datapad. Others might ask what the message was. Deep. She used to always ask. However, it was just easier to take the pad and read what it said. Some things didn't need to be heard by a random crew, and the messenger saying, "I shouldn't say," where we could be overheard, was almost as bad as the crew being read the message. A quick biometric certification, and she had the queued up message open. It was a standard intelligence report for one of the various branches of the Empress's spy rings nobody really gave a name to, but the highlighted segments stood out. She read them twice, went over connected documents, read the highlighted segment again, and looked back at the herald. It was a lot for her to not ask stupid questions like, "Is this accurate?" and "What am I looking at?" But she was long practiced in stifling that urge. Yes, the herald spoke. Is that bad? Rochelle swore. A small war fleet to move from the True Crown's border into deep space, around the same time an experimental asteroid cracker mobile mining station had vanished without a trace near said border. Combined with reports from Earth of illegal projects, pirates using old Crown stock vessels with well-trained pilots, and drugged-up shore boys with no Imperial IDs showing up on the consortium slave markets over the last handful of years, the picture was clear. There was a scheme in the works. "Did we get anything from them?" Rochelle asked her mistress-at-arms. Normally, the commander of her Marines would also be at the meeting, but she was busy working with the so-called Orcas of the Spear to clear the refueling station room by room looking for any traps or stowaways. The division lead, with more cybernetics than the average Gearchild, sighed, and motioned for her to sit down. Rochelle acquiesced. "They're being cagey, but what they're silent about has been making pictures I don't like. This wasn't their plan." Rochelle raised an eyebrow as Mistress-at-Arms Lashetta continued. "Sure they figured out the nitty-gritty, but your rival, Yellowtooth? He was told exactly where he needed to be to jump this convoy by someone. Says someone also didn't tell him that it was you leading the convoy, but they did give him a literal boatload of aerospace fighters, and a decent amount of fresh-blood pilots." "Any clues to the identity of this someone?" Rochelle probed. "Not yet, but one of the intel gals I've got mentioned finding something when she went over Run-Off Free's flight log of intercepted enemy comms. She should be getting back to me in an hour from a handful of other tasks, and I can have a report on your desk 15 after that." Rochelle nodded, drumming her fingers against the desk. "Is there anything else we can get from them?" "In my opinion, no. We're running a risk already keeping them in a half-demolished brig." Rochelle thought a moment before nodding decisively. "Starboard hangar pod. Clear a wall. Trials will be held and we'll start processing them, After I see that report from your intel team. Are you cleared to discuss this message? Rochelle asks the herald. I am, Captain. Then what are your thoughts? She asked again. The throne room was approaching, and soon it would be time to meet with the Empress. Rochelle needed to know how she should take this information. I think this is dangerous, worrying, and potentially calamitous. Rochelle let out a breath. Oh, that bad. Wonderful. Indeed. The doors loomed overhead. He of slender tail curled up around a stool next to where Ryan slept. The sure-sized medical bed made the pilot look tiny, fragile, weak in his stillness. It felt wrong, looking at him like this. An IV drip ran into his arm, as a heartbeat monitor continued its smooth reporting of his vital signs. Beep, 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 beep. Smooth, steady, not worrying. It had done so for an hour and a half as the Senf watched. He had gotten off shift, been ordered to rest, and instantly went to Cookie's side. Venture's Fourth came by 30 minutes ago, and told him that Ryan was just resting, and this was something called an adrenaline crash, and he just needed to sleep it off with an IV drip. That he was perfectly fine. But he of slender tail watched him, and all he could think of was how fragile the human looked. Wiry arms, a small waist, good shoulders, sure, but compared to the sure men he's seen, Ryan's legs looked like twigs. His sharp features looked almost delicate in the harsh lighting. The bit of hair growing around his chin, framing his face like a fine picture frame. And his eyes were shut, lashes mixed together over soft breathing. It took control for he of slender tail to not place his hand on Ryan's chest, just to feel it rise and fall, just to get a physical confirmation of the other man's breathing. But he shouldn't. The nurses wouldn't like it, and his hand might disrupt the medical equipment. How could someone so small loom so much over him? Rochelle slowed and finally stopped, standing before the doors to the Empress's throne room as golden glaives turned their helmets, and the electrical scanning equipment inside to look her over. Idly, Rochelle wondered if she should put her arms out like at a shuttle port, but instead fell back into parade rest as she waited for approval. Eventually, the glaives turned their helmets away, and the door to the throne room swung open. It was time to face the music. A batch of 10 pirates was shoved, bashed, and ordered into place in front of a wall in the starboard hangar pod. Crew of every stripe surrounded them, watching in silence as Marines, Orcas, and shipboard security stood by, surrounding the rest of the kneeling batch of pirates. It was not the full number Rochelle and the Spear had captured. Some had been able to prove they were press-ganged, or were found innocent of the various crimes levied against them, or pled mercy and were able to offer up enough valuable intelligence for lesser sentences. Most, however, ended up kneeling in the starboard hangar pod. Aside from the shouts and jeers from the pirates and orders from the naval soldiers, the deck was silent. The chaplain walked forward, the banner of the Empress held in his hand. To those condemned, you have been found guilty by a military tribunal of piracy, theft, grand theft, larceny, murder, mass murder, treason, high treason, illegal possession of warships, rape, massacre, and the active rendering of aid to those committing the above crimes. Under the Unified Imperial Code of High Justice, all present have been found guilty and your lives have been declared. There was a pause. Forfeit. An explosion of sound erupted from the kneeling company of pirates before they were beaten back down by shot batons and rifle butts. The ones against the wall just laughed. The chaplain continued. If you wish to beg for the Empress's mercy, kneel to the floor and kiss the ground. In this you show your submission, and your life shall be spent in service to the Empire that you have so warred against. Refuse, and you shall be granted a swift death." The 10 standing against the wall looked at each other before one looked at the chaplain, reeled back and spat on the ground. "Very well," the chaplain spoke. "Your choice has been made." The Marines fire at chest height, and 10 bodies hit the ground. They always pick the most likely to fight the guards for the first batch. Orca selected 10 pirates at random from the kneeling mass and dragged them towards the wall, standing them at the feet of their dead comrades. Some of them began to cry. The chaplain stamped the Empress's banner against the ground and began again. "To those condemned, you are being found guilty of piracy, theft, murder." This time, he didn't get through the speech before a pirate kissed the corpse-strewn floor before being dragged away back to the brig. The Marines fired at chest height. 7 bodies fell. Another 10 were chosen from the kneeling mass. The cycle repeated. "Oh, Shill," the captain prayed in the privacy of his head. "Please forgive your wayward children and save them from the deep." They may be pirates, but they still deserved some form of mercy. Executions never got easier. When Rochelle had first shot a soldier under her command, it was 3 noble rapists who decided that the horrific crime of the Iron Tooth should be repeated on one of her ships with one of her men. It was only the fact that the doctor reported the man might recover, and the lack of a viable planetoid that held her to discipline, to simply shoot them, instead of having them thrown from high altitude without a parachute, so they could scream all the way to their deaths. The stories reported this all, near constantly. They show her as the strong, motherly figure to her women, standing between them and those who would abuse them. For every sailor who shivered in fear when thinking of that recording, she forced every member of her fleet to watch. There were a dozen more who found themselves comforted that if they were abused, someone would protect them. It was telling that the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet had one of the highest rates of male enlistment after the matter was made public. What few cared to notice was Admiral Rochelle, unshakable and unbreakable, stiffly walking out of the room, marching into her ballroom's connected head, and throwing up the shitty Navy rations filling her guts. Her friend, Tupolev, had stumbled across her in that state, and, to his credit, had never told a soul that Rochelle had sobbed her eyes out. The weight of what had just happened hitting her all at once. The guilt of killing 3 of her sailors with a tyrant's power, smashing into her, and shattering the composure she had cultivated so carefully. The worst part was, when she next handed down high justice to 2 traitors who sold fleet secrets for time in a True Crown's pleasure cruise, all Rochelle felt was slightly queasy. Unlike the crew, who were given a bulk trial before judgment, some getting off with years of hard labour instead of a forfeited life, each and every one of the pirate flag officers that Rochelle had captured were long-time pirates, and each and every one of them had been tried in absentia and sentenced to death. Their names were known to the Imperium, with their faces put up in every station and talked about in news broadcasts whenever one had been found and brought to justice. Former Lady Venketh of House Resh for the devastation of Kentak 4, 7,643 counts of slave trading, innumerable counts of high treason, and more crimes that need not be spoken of. You have been found guilty and sentenced to death, the chaplain spoke. Rochelle raised her sidearm, and the woman handcuffed to the wall could only widen her eyes as the snap of a laser pistol flash fried her brain. The cooling corpse slumped to the floor alongside 4 others as the captain, the chaplain, and a pair of Marines moved on to the next in line. Yellowtooth, a man who had once claimed to be her rival and raised a pirate fleet to contest the 3rd Expeditionary. A man who had been captured alive after raiding a patrol vessel from the command of a barely functional frigate. So, a bit of a fall from glory for both of us, he said with a leer at Rochelle. Rochelle was silent. Gravel Kagapan, also known as the pirate named Yellowtooth, you have been tried and found guilty of... The chaplain began, before the pirate man interrupted her. Oh, don't bother. We all know how this song and dance plays out. I get to choose between death and life in service. I pick service, and I spend my days in comfort fucking some noble who wanted to be a pirate boy. So, get me the flag and I'll kiss it like I'll be kissing some pretty lady before the month is over. Sentence, Rochelle said firmly. Yes, right. Your sentence of a life forfeited to the Imperium, see, Yellowtooth sneered, has been overturned by Imperial decree. Your sentence is death. The chaplain finished with lethal finality. What? No! I was promised. Those bitches! It was the True Crowns, he said, eyes widening in panic. They set you up, Rochelle. Keep me alive and I'll... I know. Rochelle cut off her long-time rival. You have nothing important to tell me. Your comms officer and paymaster already flipped on you. We know everything you do. What? It was almost sad as the proud pirate king collapsed into himself, at the knowledge he had nothing to offer, nobody to protect himself with, nowhere to run. Wait, please! May shall show you mercy, Rochelle simply said, bringing up her pistol and shooting him before any further distraction could come along. He slumped down, and Rochelle felt nothing as the one man who could truly be called her rival ended his story alone, betrayed by his crew, and shackled to a wall. Rochelle moved on and felt a weight lift from her shoulders, as a chapter of her life closed with the snap of a laser pistol. Rochelle had once walked the environmental domes of her home on Sevastopol, those deep-cursed artificial caverns that sent all within into the depths of artificial night whenever there was heavy snow. But when she walked through them, it was a clear, bright day. The armor glass gleamed above her head and reflected off the greenhouse garden being harvested, as polished steel and brass artistry caught the light and threw it into dazzling reflections and mirrors. Rainbows painted every landscape in the open air. She had heard tales of the great Parliament ships of the Alliance, world ships that blur the line between station and vessel, great things that drank in the light through windows so every member of the Alliance's Senate could bask in the sun of the world they orbit. She had seen pictures of the Hall of Mirrors in that earthborn palace of Versailles that a noble had used to hold her wedding a year or two back. And yet, a satellite reception hall of the Imperial Palace put all three to shame in her eyes. Banners hung from the walls, backlit by gleaming stained glass windows, telling tale of 1,000 Imperial victories, the greatest honor a commander could receive. Beneath the victorious colours, enemy flags taken by Marine hands were displayed in sealed boxes etched with the names of those hands which had captured them. Millennia of defeated foes and triumphant Imperials laid out in a gleaming hall as noonday sun shone on the polished armour and sharp blades of the golden glaives, standing their eternal vigil over the Imperial family. A fine purple carpet embroidered with gold thread stretched the 200-metre-long hallway towards the centre of the entire room, the Imperial throne. Set in gleaming copper, the reception throne was intentionally made to be lesser than the one in the true throne room, but that did not make it inferior. Set atop a pyramid of 6 steps, the polished chair sat framed by windows and backlit by a clever set of mirrors and lamps. Even on a moonless night, the throne would glow with ethereal light. At these distances, Rochelle could barely make out the figure sitting the throne, the light cascading around her causing the old captain to squint, and blurred any perception of her. But she had not been stopped, not been told to halt or hold, and so Rochelle continued forward. Left foot, right foot, even pace, even tempo, back straight, head back, arms swinging opposite of her legs. Instinctively, Rochelle fell back into patterns drilled into her as a cadet at the Naval Academy. The old marches she had thought forgotten in a distant part of her mind, coming back with rigid adherence to their rules. Her well-polished boots should have clicked against the fine stone floor, the old woman idly thought, but the rug was too thick, so her footfalls were silenced. Past countless banners, Rochelle walked, head straight and facing forward. Countless awards of victory, left, right, left, right. Countless soldiers standing guard, head back, back straight. And finally, she was before the throne. A circle of bare stone was cut into the carpet, indicating quite clearly where the person was to pause, was to kneel. However, before Rochelle could begin, the herald walked past her. Captain Rochelle almost started because she forgot the small man had been with her, but watched as he stepped past the reception ring, past the gilded line that only those shown favour are permitted to pass, and began to climb the stairs. Rochelle choked down a harsh inhale. Only members of the Imperial family were allowed to climb the stairs of the throne, each step symbolising how high they rose. First step, cadet branches. Second step, direct branches. Third step, direct family. He climbed all three. Fourth step, daughters and non-heir husbands. Fifth step, heirs and husbands of heirs. He strode up them without hesitance. Rochelle did, in fact, inhale sharply when the man she thought was a mere herald rose to the sixth step of the throne's pyramid and sat down in a smaller chair connected to the main one. Something only allowed if one was a husband of the Empress. The main husband of the Empress of Shill. Rochelle stepped into the ring and fell to her knee, ignoring the protestations of her aging body, as her right fist found the floor along with her right knee, and her left leg bent in subservience. Captain Rochelle cast her head down, mind swimming with thoughts. A test? A trap? Curiosity? Why did the Empress's husband meet with her before the reception? It would explain why she recognized him, but why? Captain Rochelle, the Empress spoke, and every thought was banished from the captain's mind. You have pleased us. Instantly, stress fell from Rochelle's shoulders. You have pleased us. The safest thing the Empress could say as an opening. You have done us a duty as liable to give you a noble title, or a back-alley execution to tie up loose ends. You have accomplished much is an opening to be ordered to do more. She wouldn't even say, you have displeased us, because at that point, you barely have time to hear the words as a glaive took your head where you knelt. You, when faced with a foe most others would cower and flee from, met them in battle, and saw them destroyed. In character and duty, you captured a pirate ordered dead by mine own hand, with your own hands, and saw to the destruction of 2 enemy vessels. And throughout it all, your crew stayed steadfast and ready. You have pleased us. Rochelle stayed knelt, her head bent. Thank you, my Empress. Your words honor me. We shall honor you with more than words, but first, we must speak to our worries, Empress Tassu replied. The reports of the pirate fleet you engaged show they had access to multiple military-class vessels, not just converted merchant liners. Is this correct? That is correct, my Empress. They had access to multiple frigates and even a cruiser. Distressingly, in my eyes, they also had access to enough aerospace fighters and aerospace fighter pilots to crew them that they would have been capable of crippling the entire merchant fleet while enforcing a cap line against my interceptors, if they were allowed to engage, Rochelle reported. It seems that the foe was prepared to engage against patrol forces. Preparations that seemingly have dug up oysters in other engagements. Your sister ship was completely destroyed in the first exchange of fire, and when we look at the reports of other battles given to us by our patrol, there has been a drastic increase in losses. Not enough yet to prove a crisis, but it worries us. Rochelle remained silent, thinking through the problem. Someone was hunting the patrol. Not the Navy. Patrol. Why them? They protected merchant shipping. Attack merchant shipping and the Imperium will have to respond, or its connections between worlds will shake. How would they respond? Deploy the Navy? More ships, better convoys, larger escorts? What would that cause? Chaos, weakened borders, attrition in a delicate time. Who wants chaos in the Imperium? Alliance? Consortium? True crowns?
It seems, the Empress began, that our mercy has been betrayed, and the so-called true crowns are making a play. Their terrorism and our recent conquests, drugged-up shill boys showing up in consortium slave markets, pirate fleets swelling with material. We believe that they are preparing something that is to the great detriment of our Imperium.
Things snapped into place. This was why she was here. There was, in the end, only one response that Rochelle could give, and so she raised her head as she spoke, looking to the Empress, who was once known as the Reformer Empress, in her veiled face.
How may I serve you, my Empress?
The answer generations of officers before her had spoken, and the answer generations after her will, goddesses willing. And Rochelle watched as the Empress's flat expression rose to something akin to a smile, as she rose from her throne, husband at her side.
Stand, Captain, and walk with me. There is something we wish for your input on.
Ryan splashed water in his face as he stared into the mirror, the fading scent of bile being sucked away by the ventilation system. Ventures Forth had shown them the footage of the pirates being executed, murdered. It didn't matter that there was a veneer of law. It was still murder. A mass murder of POWs. Even after a military trial, and with the offer of death in some labor camp or penal battalion, it still felt a murder. He had remembered his grandpa telling him stories of the Pacific Front, of Marines taking skulls and laughing as they stuck flamethrower barrels into civilian shelters that happened to look like bunkers, machine gun executions, of war crimes, of returning home and being lauded a hero. Would it be the same way for him? Sure, he killed at least 20 people today, but it was combat. They were trying to kill him, and he never had to see their faces. But they were dead at his hand. And now, pirates are put up against a wall and shot if they didn't bow fast enough. After the first few batches, everyone was begging for life in prison, but others chose to spit and rage and curse in their last moments, or try and rush the Marines. They were defeated, and still fought. He was defeated, and he joined his conquerors. He lived through 773, saw his friends and squadmates shot down, went to the funerals, watched as the democracy he swore to protect died, watched as America was once more a monarchy, and the halls of power became puppets. And yet, somehow, he didn't become a terrorist, a rebel. He wanted to, sometimes, to rage and hate and scream out against this stupid system, but he didn't. He couldn't put his finger on why, but he should. One day. Someday. A cold figure pressed itself against him, as Slivers entered the bedroom attached to his hospital room.
Milk said you would be here.
She knows me too well. Slivers' body was cool against his own, scales leaching heat from his back as the other man pressed against it. He could feel the Semp's tail wrap around one of his ankles.
Do you want to talk about this?
Cookie paused, thinking. No, not now.
Okay,
Slivers replied, as the Semp began to give Cookie a hug, resting his head on the human shoulders. Slivers was good for him, Cookie conceded. The calm, quiet man was someone he needed. Milk was happy with her parties, her drinks, and in being loud, and Venture's Fourth was just as loud as her, but Cookie liked the quiet. The quiet was safe, familiar. Slivers was quiet. He liked the quiet too. Cookie idly stroked the other man's crest as he stared into the mirror. He liked Slivers, and he was pretty sure Slivers liked him too. Do you want to talk about it? So many conversations that could be asked about, but the answer was always the same for the two men. Not now. Unsaid, but heard nonetheless. It was only a half answer. Maybe not ever. Cookie was fine being quiet, and was happy Slivers was as well. Rochelle stood at ease before a holographic briefing table, as the Empress stood across from her. The room had darkened to allow the light projection proper resolution, but even in the low light the Empress's eyes gleamed under her veil as she continued to speak.
The patrol carrier is a good ship. A very good ship. But it is, unfortunately, a known and countered ship. Useful in merchant shipping patrol, harbour management, and search and rescue, but as seen in your engagement, it has difficulties. Do you disagree? No, my sovereign, Rochelle replied. Everything you have said is true. I would not bring a patrol carrier if I wished to form a true war fleet. Fleet carriers were a step in the right direction, providing patrol with a capital ship of its own, but it has its own flaws.
The infamous patrol carrier appeared from the table in a holographic projection, an 800-meter-long tube with hangar boxes bolted on, capable of sending obscene amounts of fightercraft into combat at the drop of a hat.
They were vulnerable to headhunting attacks and close range, direct fire engagements, more useful in a fleet sense, but as a support wing or planetary defense, not as suitable for patrol's needs.
Rochelle completed, memories of the Third Fleet coming across remnants of a battle the Eighth took part in, and seeing the scattered remains of their carrier wing after an ambitious destroyer pack punched through the Eighth's battle line, flickered through Rochelle's head.
The Empress nodded. Indeed. We have given our shipbuilders a challenge. Solve this problem. They have provided us with a solution that I find intriguing.
A new ship appeared on the screen. Its core was an armored tube akin to the full patrol carrier, but the specifications stated a 700-meter-long frame. A pair of sensor faux bridges surrounded by turreted laser cannons on the top and bottom of the vessel gave it some shape, but the true shaping aspect was what looked akin to a pair of wet naval carrier decks strapped vertically to either side of the vessel with an armored canopy above the rearmost section of the flight deck.
A protected place for ASF to launch and recover,
Rochelle idly mused. Ablative armor, battleship-grade engines, redundant systems up to her tits, and enough firepower that even if half the ship was destroyed, something would be able to shoot. This thing was a beast if the specifications proved true.
We have decided to call it the Patrol Interdiction Cruiser, and we believe it shall reverse the unfortunate trend in patrol's losses. The prototype vessel has completed its star trials and is ready for deployment and shakedown cruise.
The Empress paused.
We have summoned you to transfer its command over to you and your crew.
Rochelle met the pause with one of her own, running the words over in her head.
You have great trust in me, my Empress. We have reason to see this trust validated. Then I shall not displease you. I shall require new recruits, cruiser veterans, and as many high-quality engineers as you are able to provide, but I shall be capable of wielding this vessel in your name. Good. It is settled. You shall take this vessel and fulfill my orders, once it is crewed and prepared.
A smile began to grow on the Empress's face, a smile Rochelle met. And so she asked once more that eternal question.
How may I serve you, my Empress?
The smile of the sovereign of all Shilvanti turned blade-like, as she held forward a rolled scroll. An Imperial writ passed down by her own hand. A sealed order that superseded all others issued. And so, as Rochelle cracked the seal to read it, the Empress summarized all inside with one word. Hunt! Captain Rochelle, the Imperium's bloody hand and the Navy's patron saint of impossible victories, met blade with blade as she returned the feral smile. Saya Gardner wiped her brow and looked up from the crop of tuber root she had just finished planting. The long rows of burrowing plant had rapidly become a staple crop in the exiled empire, something that would grow well in the cursed soil the reformer usurpers tried to kill the true crowns with. She looked up at a clock hanging on a bulkhead and gave a quick sign of woe as it ticked over the hour mark. Never knew when the Divine Empress or her chosen hands would be watching, and piety was always rewarded. To see the crown survive. Private Saya Gardner stood and stretched before picking up her basket and moving on to another row of tuber root, and paused as she watched an officer walk into the sliding room of the grow house, hand on her stun-prod symbol of office. Private Saya Gardner of the 1st Reclamation Navy bowed low and averted her gaze as she heard the symbol of the officer's authority crackle against another Gardner's back for not standing and showing submission fast enough. One must always know her surroundings and know her superiors, Saya repeated in her head. Hearing the officer leave, she looked up and stared into a foreign sun, and almost felt guilty for basking in this periphery barbarian light. A sun whose planet would soon be shown the might of the true crown. Glory to the Divine Empress. Death to the false Empress.